Yay.
All right, wonderful. So I want to thank Cheryl and Tamara and everyone for inviting me to be here tonight to talk about supporting healthy sexuality for individuals with Down syndrome. And as Tamara mentioned, I work at the Adult Down Syndrome Center in Park Ridge, Illinois, with Brian Chicoine and four other now wonderful physicians, as well as a social worker, and then a whole team of people that help support individuals with Down syndrome ages 12 and older. We are a primary care clinic, but also provide specialty care. So many families in Illinois utilize our clinic as their, PCP, but then some choose just to come maybe once a year to do a check-in. In addition to providing the healthcare services, we provide a number of other services, including social skills groups and a music therapy group and an art therapy group. We're doing summer wellness. This summer, we do a variety of programming just to make sure, because we envision health is not just your being without illness or sickness, but also making sure that we have all those good social skills and all these good social opportunities, because that is all part of health. And additionally, I know Tamara mentioned I'm the immediate past president of DISMIG
Okay.
USA.
Yeah.
I am also I've been in OT since 2001. My first few jobs weren't in Down syndrome, but my first job in Down syndrome was at the Thomas Center for Down Syndrome at Cincinnati Children's Hospital. I was there from 2005 to 2011 when I left there to move to Chicago to get my PhD. My dissertation was Parents as the Primary Sexuality Educators for their Adolescents with Down Syndrome. So that's what we're going to talk a lot about tonight. Not my dissertation, but just the topic. And then I was lucky enough to reach out to Brian Chicoine when I was getting ready to finish with my PhD. And he wasn't hiring an OT. He was looking for someone to promote health. And I said, well, I can do that, but I can also see patients. So most of my job is to provide a lot of the resources that are in the resource library, in addition to seeing patients. Just a little disclaimer, this is just for educational purposes. I will do my best to answer any questions, but just to be aware that we're going to try to generalize the questions instead of it being like so specific, just to make sure that it applies to more people than just one on the call when we do Q&A. And then I'm not endorsing any of the products here or receiving money for anything that I talk about tonight. I like to start off with my why. And on March 16th, 1984, this little blessing arrived the day after my fifth birthday. And she was a blessing because I have four older siblings that are between 10 and a half and 17 years older than me. And I always wanted, someone closer in age. So it was wonderful to have a baby sister 5 years younger than me. But unfortunately, in February of 1987, she passed away. But she is the reason that I do what I do. I have that picture, her newborn picture on my desk. So every day I look at it, and she's just my guiding star to help me serve families like you guys. So tonight, these are the things that we're going to talk about. We're really going to focus on why talking about sexuality education is important, the topics that need to be learned or talked about, and then really how best to teach it. And then I'm going to share a variety of resources. Again, Tamara mentioned our resource library. I'm not sharing every single resource on sexuality or social skills tonight that's in there, but I'm giving you an idea of what is available. So why? Why is it important to talk about sexuality education? And this is because research shows that when adolescents receive sexuality education, the following benefits are reported. They're going to be more responsible with their sexual behavior. They're going to learn the essential skills in social etiquette and self-care. It can reduce inappropriate sexual expression, which I know is a huge concern of many families of individuals with Down syndrome. It can increase pride, confidence, and self-acceptance. It aids in the development of a personal sexual identity, but more importantly, it facilitates healthy sexual development. And then it can help recognize inappropriate sexual advances and be able to report incidents of suspected sexual abuse, which obviously is another concern of families with individuals with Down syndrome. But it's really important to understand that there are even more specific benefits when the parents are the primary sexuality educators. And again, this research is with the typical population, but it's important to know that when parents are the teachers, it's going to decrease sexual risk behavior. It facilitates healthy sexual development. The adolescent and the parents have an open and closer relationship, and parents can really individualize what they teach based on their family life, their values, their children's needs at the time, and they can modify the content so their child understands. And really, that's the biggest takeaway that I want you to have tonight, and why I feel that it's so important for parents to be the primary sexuality educators. I mentioned that my dissertation was parents as the primary sexuality educators for their adolescents with Down syndrome. So I know this topic is important. You clearly think it's important, or you wouldn't be here tonight. But it's important to understand that schools cannot provide all the information that your loved one needs about sexuality. And it could be because they are in an integrated health class, and the material's not modified so that they can understand it. They're just lectured at. Or they're in special ed and sex ed is only talked about in integrated health class. Or maybe the special ed teacher isn't comfortable talking about sexuality. Or the school board allows an abstinence only message, and so they're not necessarily learning about all aspects of sexuality education. So these are all reasons why it's important for parents to consider themselves to be the primary sexuality educators. This is, so my dissertation, I created a curriculum, which I still haven't published, which Cheryl and I have also been talking about for years, because the goal is to get this curriculum in the hands of the Down Syndrome Parent Organization so that they can provide these teachings without, me having to be there. So it's a train the trainer model. But when we created this, we did a research study on it. And there were only 26 participants. So I love that there are more people on this call tonight than participated in my research study that it ended in 2016. So we probably started in like 2014. So it's been a while now. But 73% of those participants reported that their child did receive sexuality education in the classroom setting, primarily a mainstream health class, which is, great news.
Amen.
And even more than that, 85% of parents reported previously initiating home-based sexuality education. Unfortunately, they didn't have adapted materials. So they weren't able to reinforce any of this learning with material that the individual would understand more easily. Our participants also noted that they did understand the importance of sexuality education, but they really felt like they weren't comfortable or confident talking about it, and that they were more hesitant talking to their child with Down syndrome about sexuality topics compared to their other children. And so it's really important to think about where you learned about sexuality topics, whether it was friends, media. I mean, social media didn't exist then, but, looking at magazines or, different TV shows. But this isn't really the same for individuals with Down syndrome. And we shouldn't wait for them to come to us with questions, because then we may never have these conversations, because they do not always understand that they're supposed to have questions about this. So that's why it's important for parents to take the initiative. When it comes to reasons why people don't feel comfortable talking about sexuality education, some of the parent reported barriers are that the parents feel inadequate or really lack the proper information to share. They might feel embarrassed or unsure what their child needs to know at certain, developmental stages. So they really just don't know how to approach the topic. They also, we all have personal values, and perhaps that may impact how or what a parent teaches. And they fear talking about sexuality topics are going to encourage their child to experiment. Perhaps they're uncomfortable with their own sexuality, not just the sexuality of their loved one. They have the fear of exploitation, perhaps fear of arrest or legal problems if their loved one has sexually inappropriate behaviors. Just the social appropriateness. So we talk a lot about social skills and social boundaries, and then what the future holds. However, I'm pretty sure, I mean, I'm not a parent, but I'm fairly certain that all of you parents are unsure what the future holds for many of your children, not just your children with Down syndrome. And so it really shouldn't be that different, or should keep you from wanting to talk about important topics. Now, I don't know if there are any staff um, on the call, but I thought it was important because oftentimes staff in adult programs are expected to talk about these topics. I know in the state of Illinois, we now have a law that any adult program that receives funding from the state is required to provide sexuality education. There are certain curriculums that they have to use. So really it's I wouldn't say that they're required to talk about healthy sexuality. They're really supposed to educate to prevent abuse. But at least it's a step in the right direction. But oftentimes, staff report that they themselves may have negative attitudes about sexuality in people with disabilities. They have lack of training, which I've seen. Like, I go into these programs and provide training for them. They have lack of support or resources either from the employer or from the parents because staff are reporting that the parents are the barriers and the parents aren't allowing this education to happen. Again, the lack of consent to teach and these lack of policies about sexuality and sexuality education. And again, every state is different. I think Illinois is one of the first to require this, but hopefully more states come along. The other thing is that whether, these day programs and things, they don't have policies about sexuality. And so they have trouble addressing some of these topics just because they've never really thought about it. So a lot of organizations are really trying to get policies in place. So this also came from the study. This is published data from the study that I did on the home-based curriculum. And we did 2 iterations of the study. One was for parents of adolescents, so they were ages 12 to 18. And one, once I came to the Adult Down Syndrome Center, was parents of adults ages 19 to 30. And so as you can see, didn't matter if they were 12 or 30, many parents had concerns about how to talk about or address privacy, modesty, boundaries, consent, general safety, healthy relationships, and intimate self-care. But you can see that the parents of adolescents really weren't concerned about family dynamics, contraception, and pregnancy. They weren't there yet. And when I talk about family dynamics, I mean, when adults are in relationships, oftentimes the parents are heavily involved in that relationship. And so maybe one family has different values and beliefs than the other. And so oftentimes couples break up, not because the 2 individuals with Down syndrome or the one individual with Down syndrome and the other individual has a different intellectual disability don't get along or want to be together. It's the families that don't get along or support the relationship. And then even though they weren't, adolescent parents weren't concerned about those things yet, they were really focused on working on grooming and hygiene and socially appropriate behavior, where the parents of the adults had kind of already moved past those concerns. So now that we talked about why it's important to talk about, let's talk about the topics that are important when it comes to sexuality. And what I want you to understand is that sexuality is so much more than just sexual intercourse, right? It is an integral part of who we are, what we believe, what we feel, and how we respond to others. So I like to look at it as there's like 3 aspects. One is the physical aspect of sexuality. So it's our body parts, it's sex, it's intimacy, and other sexual experiences. But it's also about who we are, our identity, our gender and gender roles, our orientation. And then there's an emotional component to sexuality. So body image and self-esteem, our sexual thoughts, fantasies, and ideas, our attitudes and beliefs, and then relationships. And a lot of times I get parents asking me, like, when should sexuality begin? Well, I can guarantee every person on this call has talked about it at least once, because when the kids were little, you talked about private body parts. You talked about naming the body parts certain names, right? You talked about public and private. So those are all ways that you address sexuality. So you've done it before, you can definitely continue to do it. And here are just some headings of ways to consider talking about different sexuality topics. And so we're going to talk more specifically about these 6 different headings. But I think it's important to know that when we go through this, it's going to look like, oh my gosh, that's so much information. But in reality, you will find that many of the subtopics go into many of these broader topics. And so if you're talking about one little area, you might be addressing way more than you even think. And this is an activity we do during the home-based training is we have these 6 topics up on the wall, on paper on the wall. And then all of the different subheadings people get, and they have to figure out where they belong. And then there's a lot of discussion because they don't know if it belongs under human development or if it belongs under pregnancy. And so then we get into this conversation. But again, it's not to feel overwhelmed. It's to make it feel like, oh my gosh, I just talked about all these different things with one small conversation. And I want you to also remember that these are many conversations. It's not a one and done. There's not just the birds and the bees talk, right? You're going to have conversations about this, or you should, over and over again. And that's okay. And it's going to take years, right? You don't need to just, be like, oh, tonight we're going to talk about human development, and tomorrow we're going to talk about dating and relationships. Take your time with this. You also want to consider both the developmental age and the chronological age when teaching sexuality topics. And when I say this, sorry, I'm going to move some stuff out of my view. The content needs to be age appropriate. So if you're talking to a 22-year-old, you need to talk about the topics like a 22-year-old needs to hear it. But your 22-year-old may still like to watch Sesame Street. So maybe you're using different visuals or characters from Sesame Street to help them understand this. Or they like to watch Friends. And so then you're going to use scenes from Friends to help them understand some of these topics. And we'll talk about the teachable moment in a minute, but then it's also like if you're watching a TV show, you will see like, people getting married. So then you can gauge what your loved one even knows about marriage. I find that when a patient comes in and they say they want to get married, I ask them what that means, and they just say the party. They don't understand all of the things about being in a marriage and having a partner and being responsible for somebody else and trying to take care of yourself and supporting the other person and taking care of themselves. And there's so much more to marriage, and they don't really get that. They just want the party. They want to dress up and have fun. Or maybe a sibling is pregnant. And so then that would be a good way to talk about how babies happen. So talking about sex, talking about your values and beliefs about sex. And then, going on about what happens as the baby develops and the body changes and all of that. And you'll see that all of these topics kind of come up in these different boxes. So when we talk about human development, normally, if I were doing this in person, I would want people to shout things out. But for the sake of time, I'm just going to show you some things that have come up to me. But if you can think of things that aren't listed, please type them in the chat. So with human development, it's things like identification of sexual body parts, talking about puberty and your body changes as you age, and all the different things that happen during puberty, and the physical differences between males and females. You're going to want to talk about privacy of the body. And I say that because when I talk about privacy, I talk about privacy of the body. You have private behaviors, you have private places, and then you have private talk. So private body parts is just one aspect. But privacy of the body will also lead to consent, which isn't necessarily under human development. You'll find it under a different heading. Feelings of arousal, grooming and hygiene, self-esteem. So those are all different topics that fall under human development, but again, can fall under any of these other topics. So the next big heading is dating and relationships. So here we find things like types of relationships and crushes, alternate sexual identities. So that's just an easier way, for the LGBTQ plus communities, boundaries, who to date. So we know a lot of individuals tend to have crushes or want to date celebrities or their coach or teacher. And so, making sure they know who's appropriate to date, how to plan a date. There are a lot of skills required in how to plan a date. And individuals with Down syndrome don't necessarily have all of the skills to do this. So we do have a resource on it that I'll show you in a bit, but they often require assistance from family to help plan a date. Handling rejection, which I know was an important topic to talk about today. And it's important to know that handling rejection is not just in a romantic relationship, but people handle rejection or have to deal with rejection every day. And so we'll talk about that in a bit. The difference between a healthy relationship and an unhealthy relationship. And again, when we talk about relationships, these are not just romantic relationships because we have a variety of relationships with people in our lives, family and friends, things like that. So it's important to know that some relationships are unhealthy and what to do when that happens. We might have to break up with someone. Consent is an important aspect. Marriage is obviously on many people's mind when it comes to talking about dating. And then socially appropriate behavior. So where is it appropriate to have to display physical touch? And what are you comfortable with? And talking about that, especially with the boundaries. And then one of the subheadings is sexual activity. So this is going to be kissing, touching, foreplay, intercourse, safety, consent. And again, you see that intercourse is just one aspect of talking about sexual activity. And again, there have been so many other topics that I mentioned before intercourse even came up in just these subheadings. And then there's talking about sexual health, use of contraception, sexually transmitted infections, menstruation, masturbation, wet dreams, erections, sexual health exams, and menopause. And then when it comes to pregnancy, how pregnancy happens, the changes to the body, giving birth, and then actually raising a child should be part of pregnancy. Because again, I've co-presented on relationships a lot with a variety of different couples with Down syndrome, and one in particular had said when parents asked about having kids, and they said it's hard enough for us to take care of ourselves. Why would we want to try to worry about taking care of a child on top of that? And they're not wrong, right? And so I think that's a really responsible decision that they made. They weren't told they couldn't. Their families didn't say, no, you are not allowed to have children, but they came to the conclusion on their own that it wasn't a good choice for them. And then when it comes to rights and responsibilities, laws and consequences, so I feel like so many individuals with Down syndrome get away with things that we might get arrested for because they have Down syndrome. They might go up and touch someone without their permission, and they don't get arrested. They don't get charged with assault. It's just, oh, they have Down syndrome. And I'm not saying they should, but I think they need to understand that what they do is wrong. And there should be some kind of punishment for them, because if we don't punish them, then they might keep doing it. And again, not saying like arrested or throw them in jail, but there needs to be, and this isn't even just when they break the law. Like there should be consequences for their actions when they do things that they're not supposed to. It shouldn't be like, oh, it's just because they have Down syndrome, or oh, they're so cute, which often happens for many individuals. Consent has appeared again here, talking about rights and responsibilities, exploitation and abuse, and obviously the prevention of that. And then responsibilities of marriage and responsibilities of parenting. So those are all the 6 headings that were kind of sexuality topics, but it's also important to think about these 9 specific topics for healthy relationships. And like I said, we need these skills for any kind of healthy relationship, not just romantic ones. And that's how I tend to get families to buy in to coming to trainings or signing up their loved ones for dating and relationship skills, social skills groups that I run. It's because we talk about skills for successful relationships, because you need this to have any kind of successful relationship, not just romantic ones. So again, when it comes to social skills, these are having appropriate greetings and knowing how to make an introduction and having good manners And asking and answering questions, that can often be hard for individuals with Down syndrome. They might do a good job of answering questions asked of them, but then coming up with a question to respond back to keep that conversation going may be a challenge for them. Or they have scripted speech, and so they know certain questions they're supposed to ask, but then when those questions run out, or um, they have, or this other person has changed the subject, they don't know what to do, and they might just leave the conversation. So really working on the reciprocal conversation skills and staying on topic is a huge one. Individuals with Down syndrome are fairly egocentric, right? They like to talk about themselves, so they do a really good job with that. But then if it again goes and changes and it's not about them, they have a harder time staying engaged in that conversation. Taking turns in a conversation, compromise is really important, apologizing, and then also generalizing these skills across different settings. So when it comes to social skills, the like rules that we all kind of follow when it comes to social skills are fairly abstract. We know we're supposed to act a certain way at church versus when we're at home versus at work, right? And individuals with Down syndrome may not necessarily get that because it's too abstract. They need things to be very concrete. So you might have to say, these are our church rules, these are our home rules, things like that, because they're not going to just naturally generalize those skills. And all of these, when we work on any of those components, are going to really help support them and allow them to have strong and positive relationships with their family and friends. When it comes to social boundaries, it's things like personal space, appropriate touch, public versus private. With conflict resolution, they need to have the skills like flexibility, which we know individuals with Down syndrome are not. I mean, their bodies are flexible, but their minds are not so much. They're fairly rigid. Having to generalize skills, again, comes under conflict resolution. Working as a team, having to have different problem solving skills, and again, compromise are all different ways that you can manage conflict. When it comes to handling rejection, they just have to know how to respond when someone says no and what that means. So if someone says no, that doesn't mean they're in trouble. It doesn't necessarily mean they didn't do anything wrong. And so it's important to practice saying no to them sometimes and see how they respond, and then using that as the teachable moment to help them find a positive way, or maybe not a negative way to respond when someone does say no. Because when I ask individuals with Down syndrome in our groups, have your parents ever told you no? They always say, no, of course not. But I know you have. Like, they don't get to do everything that they want to do. Um, so another way you can practice that as parents is if you tell them no, you can tell them what they can do instead. So maybe it doesn't seem like such a negative thing, but reminding them that no doesn't mean they're in trouble or they did anything wrong. When it comes to understanding emotions, and they have to be able to name them, know what that means, and how to manage them appropriately, which can be really, really challenging. How to communicate how they're feeling effectively is also an important skill to have. We talked about some of these dating skills, who's appropriate to date, how to find someone to date, asking someone out on a date, planning the date, and then just showing respect to the person that you're on a date with. Again, consent comes up with healthy relationships, trying to talk to them about what it means. So we'll talk about this at the end, but consent means giving permission, and both people need to give permission in order to be in a relationship or to see our body or touch our body. And so here at the clinic, I am not anti-hugging. However, I do not feel that it is appropriate. And if you watch our video, people should not be hugging their doctors or their therapists. And so here at the clinic, because even though we are not family, many people think we are like family, we just prompt that you need to ask permission first. You can't just go in for a hug. You need to say, "Can I hug you?" And then that person has the right to say yes or no. And the same goes for, I mean, the staff here don't ever prompt for hugs. Well, I can't say never, but most often they do not. But it's okay for if that person with Down syndrome doesn't want to be touched or hugged to say no. And that's another part of consent. And then abuse, no one should touch you without your permission, and what to do if that happens. And then intimacy, what it is, what are you comfortable with? And so we talk about that a lot with individuals that are in relationships, that they have to decide what type of touch they are comfortable with. They need to be able to communicate that to their partner. And then they have to know what their partner's comfortable with and respect that. And they have to kind of be on the same page for that. And then again, public and private comes under intimacy. So those are all the different topics that I find that are important to talk about. But I think you as parents really want to know how to do it now, right? So we've talked about the why, we've talked about what needs to talk about, but how do we go about talking about all of these different things? And so before I get into it, I really want to focus on this slide, that you as parents need to acknowledge your attitudes about sexuality and disability, because the topic of sexuality and disability is a complicated one. And it's laden with all of our own values and beliefs about ourselves, our bodies, our relationships with others. And these beliefs then impact our interactions with the individuals with Down syndrome. And then for parents, not staff, it's really important then that you communicate your values. And I didn't really address, which we do this in the home base. We talk a lot about values and myths and misperceptions. But it's important that you acknowledge what your values are, but they shouldn't hinder your teaching, right? Because you may not have the same values that your parents had, so you shouldn't necessarily expect your child or children to have the exact same values you have, but it's important that you share what those values are. And then it's important to recognize sexuality as a healthy and positive aspect of being human. And by doing this, you give permission. And you're not giving permission for like approval for like any sexual acts or things like that or behaviors, but you're giving permission for the individual to approach you with any questions. It means that you're recognizing that that person is a sexual being. This is where you're going to work on trying to find resources that are going to be useful, even if it's just kind of having it on the back burner for a future conversation. This is where you're going to be prepared to have very specific discussions about different aspects of sexuality. And you might also, this is your opportunity to set boundaries, what you can talk about, what you can't talk about, what you can and cannot do, and maybe social expectations. And again, I know parents fear that if they start talking about this, they're going to kind of open up Pandora's box and their loved one's going to engage in the activities that are discussed. But truly, that is a myth that, and while it could possibly happen, that's not the point, and it very rarely happens. And honestly, I can say not that this is 100% true, but with couples that I have spoken to, where both individuals have Down syndrome, their interest in having intercourse is low. That is not their reason for being in a romantic relationship. They really want it for the having that partner, having that companion. They do share touch and affection, but intercourse is not their goal, and many again choose not to have it. So I don't know if that makes you all feel any better. I'm not saying that I haven't met a person with Down syndrome who hasn't, or I have met people with Down syndrome who have had sex, but they have not been in relationships with someone else with Down syndrome. And then the final role of the parent is to share the information. And you really want to make sure that the information is accurate, understandable, timely, and relevant. And you really need to begin with the most immediate need. And you, as parents, are going to know maybe you've seen your son touching himself. And so then maybe you're going to talk about masturbation. Or you can tell that your daughter has a crush on someone. And so then maybe you start there. But it's important to consider the individual's learning style, and we're going to talk even more about that. You're most likely going to be using visual strategies and simple language. We talked about the teachable moment. So again, you can take a TV show or a movie they're watching and see what they understand about it. or if a family member is pregnant or getting married, utilize that to, again, gauge their understanding of the topic. And so then you can kind of figure out what you need to teach. And then it's important that you are a role model and that you model healthy attitudes and respectful boundaries. So if you're teaching them about consent, then it's important for you as a parent to knock on a closed door and wait for permission to enter. If you have to help with self-care skills, ask before jumping in and helping. Do you need help? Can I help you? Is it okay that I touch you? Those are all important things because it's going to help them truly understand that their body is important and that no one should be touching them without their permission. So there are two ways to approach sexuality education. Excuse me. One is planful and the other is reactive. So with the planful approach, this is when a situation involves sexuality or sexual behavior, the parent or disability service provider takes the initiative and uses the opportunity to teach instead of punish or scold. And being planful creates a learning experience for everyone involved, leading to improved communication and knowledge. Whereas reactive is when that same situation happens, the person responds to the situation by restricting, punishing, or limiting the behavior or communication. And this response contributes a negative message about sexuality and sexuality education. And so you're probably thinking, well, Katie, I can't be planful for everything if I don't know what's going to happen. But I'm telling you, you can still be planful after the situation happens as a reaction without being reactive. And I'm going to show you how. So here, Mike is caught masturbating by a social worker in the hallway at his transition program. And here we're going to have the staff being reactive. They yell at him to stop touching his penis. So then because he gets yelled at and they heard penis, everyone else in the hallway stops and stares and laughs at him. And then you as a social worker shame him and send him to talk to the dean and say, oh, you're going to get in so much trouble. And then before he walks to the dean's office, you tell him his parents are going to be so mad and disappointed in him when they find out. So then Mike gets home and you ground him by restricting his community outings and taking away his phone. And he feels shamed for doing something that he thought was natural, and he does not understand what he did was wrong, why what he did was wrong. So this is reactive because you are punishing. You're not teaching, right? And you're not supporting him. So he thinks he's going to get in trouble. Then he gets home and he gets in trouble, but he gets in trouble by he doesn't get to go out and he gets his phone taken away, which doesn't even correspond to his behavior, right? I mean, it would have been one thing had he been taking pictures of his penis on his phone, then you're going to take the phone away. Those kind of match. But either way, Mike's like, I don't understand. I was just touching myself. It felt good, and here I'm in trouble. But we could also be planful. So this exact same things happen. Mike is masturbating in the hallway, but instead the social worker talks with Mike about the concepts of private and public and says, you know what, your penis is really something that should be touched in private. And then tell him everything at the day program or the transition program is considered a public space, even the bathrooms, because the bathrooms are multiple stall. And then you say, but you can talk with your parents about where it's appropriate to masturbate at home. And then you send home visual supports on public and private and masturbation. So then once he gets home, the parents review the content that the social worker sent home. And they tell Mike, you know what? You can masturbate or touch your penis at home when you're in your bedroom or the bathroom with the door closed, because those are private areas. And then if he has any other questions, he can talk to you or another trusted adult about them. So you can see here, he still did something wrong, but he didn't get punished for it. He was taught what he should be doing instead. And I think that's the important thing. And it's often very hard because if you did see Mike masturbating in the hallway at school, you probably would yell too. But it's important to just remember, what can I do to make this a positive experience instead of a negative one? And so then again, it's important to think about learning styles when we teach. So we want to be planful, but we also want to consider learning styles. And we know that many individuals with Down syndrome are visual learners, so they need to see the information or material in one form or another. But it often may help them if we incorporate auditory strategies so they hear the information along with motor. So they need to do an activity or practice a skill or manipulate the material physically in order to learn most effectively. So in the home-based curriculum, we actually do an activity where the parents themselves figure out if they're primarily visual, auditory, or motor learners, and then they think about what their child may be. And again, we all have one that is like our primary, but many of us do well with a little bit of all three of these. So what might that look like? When we think of visual strategies, we might have visual supports like pictures or schedules. It can be words or pictures. Visual supports are not just photos. We can use social stories. We can just demonstrate. We can watch movies or videos, and we know individuals with Down syndrome can verbatim repeat different scenes from movies. So we know that they do a great job learning from movies and videos. And then maybe using written materials, but that have lots of graphics. If we're to use auditory learning strategies, we might use verbal praise or verbal prompts. Maybe they listen to a social story, whether you're reading it to them or it's like an audiobook that's already been recorded for them. Maybe they can read it out loud or having some kind of group discussion. And then motor strategies would be practice and experimenting, perhaps role playing, having them model behavior that you're showing them, writing something down, or making it a game. It's really funny though, as much as individuals with Down syndrome love to be on stage and sing and act, many individuals truly have a hard time with role play, like giving them a scenario, because again, it's so abstract. When they're acting, they kind of understand it, but when you're like, imagine this, they're like, I don't have a brother. Okay, well, just pretend you have a brother, but I don't have a brother. I only have a sister. Okay, well, then you're talking to your sister, and you have to really make it as realistic for them when they role play as possible. So here's another little case study so we can kind of think about how these learning strategies would apply. At work, the boss is concerned that your young adult with Down syndrome is having trouble with personal boundaries and has been touching peers inappropriately. Basically, they're hugging their coworkers and customers. The boss does not want your child to be fired for this behavior. You've also kind of recently noticed some similar behaviors when you've been with your child in public. So what could you do to address this? And again, these are different activities that we incorporate in the home base training. So again, I would normally be like, oh, what do you think would be some visual strategies? But for sake of time, you could do a social story on hugging or appropriate touch. You could demonstrate appropriate touch, both the type of touch as well as where to touch for different people. You could have a picture of people that they can hug and or pictures of strangers with an X through them. And then the circles curriculum provides some visual strategies. And I'll talk about the circles curriculum in a minute for those who may not be familiar with it, because you're going to see that the circles curriculum provides visual, auditory, and motor learning strategies. When it comes to auditory, verbal praise when they touch appropriately, good job, or if you have like a secret word so that, that's for when they are doing what they're supposed to be doing without like really making it a big deal. Maybe verbal prompts when they touch inappropriately, something like hands to self, but also could be like a word like spaghetti so they know, oops, and no one else is aware that you're kind of prompting them. Maybe they listen to or read a story about hugging, and again, the circles curriculum. And then different types of motor strategies for this situation might be practicing the appropriate touch, both the different types and with the different relationships of people in their lives, having you model appropriate touch and having them model it back. Role play what they could do if a stranger came up or a customer came up to them and asked them for a hug. Maybe they could write a list of people they can hug. And again, the circles curriculum. So I hope that helps a little bit understand how to address some of these topics. But now for the rest of the time, I really want to go through different resources that you all might find helpful. And then again, we'll have plenty of time for questions. So here are resources that we have in our resource library. We know that individuals with Down syndrome, or we know in general, people learn best through if they could see themselves doing it. But if you can't video yourself, having a video of someone that looks like you or resembles you, so this peer modeling. So the videos in our resource library star people with Down syndrome for that very reason. So here we've got Christina talking about how she touches different people in her lives. And then here Christina's then going to be teaching your child about appropriate touch and not you. And we also know that individuals are less likely to want to listen to their parents. So if someone else is telling them to do something, they may be more likely to do it. And we have corresponding handouts that go with the video to remind you how you can touch people in your life. But again, what's important is that when the families teach this, they might have different expectations, right? So maybe, so Christina here is holding hands with her brother, but in theory, you can hug and kiss with your family too, but like maybe siblings don't hug and kiss, right? Maybe they only high five, and that's okay. They can do that if that's what works for your family. So again, trying to make it as concrete as possible. And so families might do touch differently, or, depending on your culture, you may kiss everybody, right? But in this video, perhaps Christina's saying she doesn't kiss her aunt and uncle, so these are kind of things to consider. But again, what's your values are and beliefs, and it's important to make those changes as needed. But I mentioned the Circles curriculum. So for those of you who aren't familiar with it, it is a published curriculum that a lot of times schools have, but it's pretty expensive. And I haven't seen the most updated version, but they have updated it as far as the material, because when I trained and taught it, it was on a VHS tape. So that's how old ours was. I know it's not on that anymore. They even have an app, but the concepts have all stayed the same. So you have these circles and the person's in the inside circle, and then the further out that circles go, the less you can touch, talk, and trust, right? So then it goes family, friendship, acquaintance, community helpers, and strangers. And when you do the curriculum, it has, you create your own circles. So you like color in each week or every session, and you can write in the people that belong there. They have a huge mat on the floor or on the wall, and you can kind of put pictures of your loved ones on that so you can practice. You're watching videos so that they're again learning through visual, and there's opportunities to practice. So that's going to kind of do visual, auditory, and motor. We have a resource that just kind of looks at like the touch, again, adapted from the Circles curriculum. We don't have one for talk or trust, but just thinking about how you can touch others and how others can touch you, just as, again, a template, and you can modify it as needed. But again, these are important things to try to make as black and white as possible. I mentioned consent as something that can be challenging to talk about. But again, it just means to give permission, and it's okay to change our mind. We can give permission one day and we can take it away another time. That just because, so in a relationship, if we are okay kissing our boyfriend one day, but then don't want to kiss him the next day, or we're in front of our parents and we don't want to kiss him in front of our parents, it's okay to say no. But that doesn't mean they're not going to say yes again. And then again, both people have to give permission to be boyfriend and girlfriend. I think that's an important one, because a lot of people are just constantly calling someone their boyfriend or girlfriend without having that conversation. Permission to touch our body and how they can touch it, and then who can see our body. And always knowing that if someone touches you without your permission, to talk to a trusted adult. When it comes to public and private, we have a variety of resources. This one just kind of talks about, again, those private um, behaviors, private places, and body parts. And then what public is. And we have one for female and male. And then we also have stories. So we don't call them social stories because those are copyrighted, but we just have stories about. So we have a story about privacy for boys, as well as a story about privacy for girls, and then a general one about story about public. When it comes to social skills, we have a number of resources, but why are conversation skills important in romantic relationships? Why is it important that we communicate? We don't necessarily have to talk, but communicate in a relationship, perhaps having rules for conversations. Compromise. Compromise is a hard one. So what does it mean? What's it require us to do, and how can we do it? And so we kind of give like three different ideas. And this was Jacob and Christina trying to plan a date and trying to figure out what they're going to do, and they don't want to do the same thing. Um, and then boundaries. So we talk about three different types of boundaries. There's personal boundaries. So that's personal space and what type of touch you're comfortable with. There's social boundaries, how much we talk, text, and hang out, or the topics that we talk about. And then there's environmental boundaries. So respecting the spaces and property we interact with throughout the day. And I don't know that people really focus so much on the environmental boundaries, but we also have a resource about living with roommates or housemates. And so we talk a lot about environmental boundaries in that. Some people have trouble figuring out where they can meet someone to date. So there's a resource about giving them ideas on different places that they can meet someone to date. We have a resource on what a relationship is, who we can have relationships with, the differences between romantic and non-romantic relationships. This resource on how to plan a date. So again, with our friends Jacob and Christina, and it is kind of like a little workbook. So it goes through the things they need to think about. And then there's like a summary page that they can write in all their answers if they want, so that they can think about maybe who they're asking out on a date, where they're going to go, how they're going to get there, who's going to pay, things like that. Not too many people like math, but we have come up with an equation for the ingredients for a successful relationship. So it requires good communication and positive interactions. And then what does all that mean? And so like in a social skills group, we will focus on all of those topics to make sure that people know what good communication means, what positive interactions mean. And then breaking up. So what is it? Why do people do it? How should we do it? Things like that. Just having a different resource on breaking up, because it does happen, whether it's a friend or a romantic partner. Kind of having rules for sharing touch and affection, again, trying to make it as black and white as possible. Handling rejection, there's a resource. Again, it just means not getting something that you want. There are different types of rejection. Is it okay? And how to handle it, giving them ideas. And then so even we have a variety of resources on different emotions and how to manage our emotions and coping skills and using I statements and things like that. When it comes to body changes, there is a story about body changes for girls, as well as a story about body changes for boys. Most of our resources, probably not all of them yet, but it should be soon. We do have at least 2 skin colors, if not 3, for all of these resources. Just so again, if someone's looking at this, that even though they're the board maker pictures, it might look more like them than someone else. A variety of resources on menstruation, whether it's a story about getting your period or a story about when to change your menstrual hygiene product. Also, how to change period panties, tampons, as well as your pad. So those are step by step. We have visual stories on masturbation, so just generally about masturbation, and then a story about how to masturbate. And then menopause. So these are some of our, I guess they were done last year, but they seem really new to me. We have, so not just what menopause is, but then we have for the different symptoms, the whole thing. So menopause and hot flashes, menopause and managing emotions, menopause and weight gain, and menopause and sleep. So that can be really helpful as someone gets older. We do know that a lot of women uh, start experiencing menopause or start or get menopause or are menopausal, I guess, in their 40s. Um, and again, menopause is not having your period for a full year. So they could be premenopausal before that. And they might not know how to describe some of these symptoms. So they might not know what hot flashes are, or that they're having night sweats. And it can be really confusing. And so these are stories that can help with that. It's also important, we don't have resources in our resource library yet, but just talking about orientation versus identity. And so there is a really great website, genderbread.org, that has a variety of these resources if you feel like you need to address identity and orientation, whether it's a family member or the individual themselves. There are a ton of great resources there for that. And I just want you to remember tonight that sexuality is a right. It's a very broad topic. But you as parents play an important role in the sexuality education of your children, especially your children with Down syndrome. It's important to be planful, to teach the way the person learns best, and it's okay to ask for help. You are not going to know everything. So if your loved one does happen to come to you with a question and you don't know, it's okay to say, that is a really great question. I'm going to find an answer for you, but I don't have it right now. I have a ton of additional resources. So I'm happy to share this PowerPoint also so that can get emailed out if need be. But this QR code is for this specific resource in our resource library that has a list of a variety of sexuality resources. So whether it's the things that we have in our resource library on sexuality and healthy relationships, a variety of websites that offer different resources that are all free, and then different videos that are available for free. So just so that you all have that, it's 2 pages, but it's in our resource library, which I'll, show you that too. Because we just want to make sure, I mean, well, we have a lot of great resources. There are a ton of amazing resources out there that are really good for families. These are just some references, but here is our resource library, the QR code and the link. Our Facebook page and Instagram, we do 1 post a day. If you have any interest in what's going on in our clinic, you are welcome to sign up for our email newsletter. We just send it out 1 to 2 times a month. It shares new resources, talks about different events either that we're offering as webinars or other webinars that we know are available. And then here's my contact information. You are always welcome to reach out to me with any questions. I'm happy to help. So with that being said, I haven't been looking in the chat or anything like that during the whole presentation, but I'm going to, if that's okay with everyone, stop sharing my screen so I can see people to start answering questions.
We did get a couple of questions, and I am pretty sure that we will have more, but I will go ahead and read them to you if that's easiest. How do you handle when your son or daughter doesn't want to date somebody with DS? Are the resources for this?
We hear this a lot. Uh, the only resource we have in our resource library is we talk about who is appropriate to date. So we talk about how we list that it's someone that is similar in age, similar in ability, has similar interests than us. But yeah, we find that a lot of individuals don't want to date someone with a disability. They want to date someone like that's typical. And that can be really challenging. Uh, but yeah, just kind of reiterating that similar abilities. And maybe they think they all have similar abilities. But we also can't date someone that's not interested in us. Again, that comes back to the consent, and then we both have to give permission to date.
Okay, and here's another question. How do you handle someone with DS who has been sexually abused?
Well, so it depends. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to handle that. Um, you want to try to find someone that they can talk to. So it'd be great if there's a social worker or psychologist or even someone who works for one of the abuse agencies that is trained in working with someone with an intellectual disability. That doesn't happen very often. But honestly, they don't need to know how to work with someone with an intellectual disability. They need to want to do it because you're going to be talking about all the same information. You just have to figure out how that person needs to hear it. Um, and so we talk about that a lot, that everyone's like, oh, well, I don't work with someone with, I can't work with people with Down syndrome. Well, you can. I mean, anyone can. You just have to